most important and difficult policy challenges facing the United States and Europe in the coming years. In the period after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was a general consensus on the broad outlines of Western policy towards Russia. But Europe and the United States both emphasized the promotion of democracy and economic reform and tried to integrate Russia into a new emerging security order in Europe. On both sides of the Atlantic, it was hoped that Russia would become a partner, not an adversary. Since 2003 to 2004, however, this consensus has begun to break down, and as a consequence, the United States and European policy have, in my view, begun to diverge. Over the past 2 years, U.S. policy towards Russia has hardened, reflecting growing U.S. disenchantment with the direction taken by Russian internal and foreign policy under former President, now Prime Minister Putin, especially towards policy towards the former Soviet space. Europe, on the other hand, has generally tended to pursue a policy emphasizing political and economic engagement with Russia. However, of course, within Europe, the consensus has also shown signs of eroding, with Britain, the Baltic states, some East European countries, particularly Poland, advocating a tougher line towards Russia, while France, Germany, and others have counseled caution. At the same time, Russian policy itself has begun to shift. The initial emphasis under Yeltsin on forging closer ties to the West has been replaced by a harsher, more nationalistic tone and a more critical approach to relations with the United States and Europe. Internally, this has been accompanied by an increased centralization of political power in the Kremlin, growing constraints on the independent media and other political freedoms, and a strengthening of state control over strategic sectors of the economy, particularly the energy sector. Buoyed by rising oil prices, Russia today is in a much more self-confident and assertive mood, although I would say the last 3 weeks may have dimmed that somewhat. Moscow believes that the West, above all the United States, sought to exploit its weakness after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now that it perceives itself as being stronger, it seems determined to renegotiate the terms of its relationship with the West, a relationship which it sees as having had far more advantages to the West than to Russia itself. That's their perception. I'm not saying it's an analytical statement. At the same time, Russia is determined to reassert its influence over the former Soviet space, which it regards as part of its historical sphere of influence. The Russian invasion of Georgia was designed not simply to punish President Saakashvili for pursuing a pro-Western policy and seeking membership in NATO, but it also was designed, in my view, to draw a line in the sand and send a broader message to the West. Russia, that message was that Russia is prepared to defend its strategic interests in areas that it considers vital, in areas that fall in what it regards as its traditional sphere of influence. For that reason, the invasion represents an important and highlights the need for the West to rethink its policy towards Russia. This does not mean, I emphasize, a return to containment or the Cold War. This is not in the interest of the United States nor in Europe. However, at the same time, the West cannot allow the invasion of Georgia, which is a sovereign state, to go unchallenged. Otherwise, Moscow could be tempted to put pressure on other countries in the former Soviet space using similar tactics. And here, I think, the question of Ukraine is particularly important. There is a danger that Russia could be tempted to stir up separatist pressures in Crimea and then use the resulting turmoil as a pretext to intervene under the guise of protecting ethnic Russian population of the peninsula. This danger is all the more acute because in the aftermath of the Georgian invasion, President Medvedev has argued that there are certain regions in which Russia has privileged interest. The United States and Europe need, therefore, to develop a coherent, coordinated strategy that makes clear that this new Russian policy is unacceptable and will have serious consequences for Russia's relations with the West. This response, however, must be firm but not provocative. It should be designed to underscore that the United States and Europe desire close and friendly relations with Russia, but that these relations must be based on respect for international law and the UN Charter. At the same time, the United States and Europe should strengthen economic and political support for countries in the former Soviet space, especially Ukraine. Moscow should be clearly told that the United States and Europe do not accept the concept of special zones of influence, and that the UN Charter and international law apply to post-Soviet space as well as other areas of the globe. It is important that this message be carefully coordinated and that the United States and Europe speak with one voice, as Russia will inevitably try to drive a wedge between the two sides of the Atlantic. At the same time, the door to NATO should be kept open to Ukraine and to Georgia. But the timing of their entry into NATO should depend on their ability to meet the criteria for membership and on the broader environment of European security. At the same time, NATO needs to undertake, before it expands again, it needs to undertake a fundamental analysis of how it would defend any new members. Admitting new members with a hollow commitment that is one that it cannot be carried out would be worse, in my view, than no commitment at all. This short review highlights how much the transatlantic agenda has changed in the last decade. In the past, the transatlantic agenda was dominated primarily by issues in Europe. Today, most of the key challenges to transatlantic security, with the exception possibly of Russia, are beyond and emanate from beyond Europe's borders. Neither Europe nor the United States has the capacity to manage these challenges on their own. They can only be resolved through better and more intensive transatlantic cooperation. Europe needs a strong and enlightened America that remains, as Madeleine Albright once said, the so-called indispensable nation. At the same time, Europe is and will remain the most important partner in helping to resolve key security challenges of the 21st century. The challenge for both Europeans and Americans, therefore, is to help Europe transform itself from being a set of disparate partners into being the partner on a range of issues where only the aggregated power of the United States and Europe can prevail. In short, and in conclusion, while the United States will remain the indispensable nation, a strong and united Europe, capable of acting globally, will become, hopefully, the indispensable partner. Thank you.